What's up, skate fam? Welcome to Deez Skates. Today's episode is all about the Endless 80 Ultra. This one is going to be lengthy and in-depth, which you already expected if you're a returning viewer. So strap in and make some popcorn and grab your favorite beverage. First off, I want to give a huge shout out to my friend Kurt Lauerman, who came along for a skate one afternoon and did a bunch of filming for me. You might see his face or hands pop into frame from time to time, which I think is kind of funny. Well, that's because he is filming with two cameras at once, and one was my Insta360. So take into account the skill level required to skate and film with two cameras at one time. That said, I have the original first generation Endless 80, 90, and 100 that came out in the company's first release of 2020. Now called the MK1 model. I also have the first prototypes of the Trinity version of the Endless 80 and 90. I've got the Endless Arc and Arc CS, and I've even got some prototype frames that never made it to production. Needless to say, I have had plenty of experiences with Endless products over the last 5 years, and while I do have a pretty hefty collection of frames from other brands, I generally skate Endless frames before anything else, unless there is no Endless option for what I want to do. Since I have so many Endless frames, the release of the Endless Ultra frame line kind of flew over my head, and I found myself mostly learning about it months after release from a review that Bill Stoppard put out. What really piqued my interest is that he spent a significant portion of his video discussing the parallels between the Endless 80 Ultra and ice hockey skates. For those of you who don't watch this channel often, I've mainly spent the last few years on the ice learning ice figure skating and ice dance, and working as a power skating coach for hockey players. So I spend a lot of time in my ice skates, and I've come to prefer them over inlines. Don't throw stones. I know what you're thinking. What does all that have to do with inline skating? Well, a lot. I've spent years looking for the perfect translation of ice to inline. So when I watched Bill Stoppard's review, I knew I had to get my hands on these frames and reached out to Endless to get a pair. Spoiler alert, I was skeptical that they'd really be much different than the original Endless 80 that I have, but the difference couldn't be more obvious to me now that I've been skating them for a while. And that brings us to what this review is really about. So let's get into why the Endless 80 might be the best variation of the 4x80 format ever made. Wait a second. No. The Endless 80 Ultra, David, not the Endless 80. Back to the video. As well as what I think it could have done a little better. While I won't waste your time with another standard unboxing, I will say that as soon as these came out of the box, I loved the look of these frames. The dimensions and lines, combined with the brilliant metallic violet color, really make the frames stand apart from the standard 4x80 frame that other brands always seem to try and scale down in weight by removing large segments of the frame's body, taking away just as much from the design, in my opinion, as it does the weight. Or, on the opposite end of the spectrum, the giant, bland trapezoid designs found commonly in so many brands lately, who seem like they're trying to capitalize on the popularity of a certain company, which now has an entire skating subculture built around it and its brand. Make no mistake, these are not Wizard copies, and they're clearly not designed for Wizard skating, which I'll discuss further in a bit. First, I also want to show you the wheels that came with them. I chose Endless's new coral color 80mm wheels in bullet profile for overall speed and acceleration, as well as an easier change from edge to edge than typical round profile wheels provide. This is something I really like. Releasing products in a wide variety of colors seems to be such a major focus for Endless over the last few years, and to have built such a variety is something I can really appreciate. Something I always love about Endless frames is how they're made to precision specs. I can snap all the wheels into place between each wheel boss, and generally they stay in place without their axles. In fact, I often show this off to my friends by holding the skate upright in the air and inserting the axles without any wheels falling out in the process. I don't think I've ever been able to do this with frames from any other brand. In comparison, between these Ultra frames and the original Endless 80s that I have, the most obvious difference to me is the 80 Ultra is shorter than the regular Endless 80. The main reason for this is that the original Endless 80 is actually a 255mm wheelbase 4x84 frame that Endless has marketed to encourage people to use 80mm wheels with. The 80 Ultra has a wheelbase of 249mm. Since the Ultra is a true 4x80 frame, it's still long for its type, as industry standard for 4x80 is a wheelbase of 243mm. So we have just over a ½ centimeter of extra length, which you might not think would make a difference in feel, but you'd be wrong. It definitely does. The other major difference in these two frames is that the regular Endless 80 is a multi-setup frame. It's a 4x84 and a 3x100. And that brings us to a big part of why this Ultra frame is able to completely outperform it. When we examine any of the dual setup Endless models, we can see that the frame has no bridges in it. This is because it can't have anything between the walls of the frames that might impede the placement of the different wheel setups. I know that the MK2 model, which I don't have, did make some changes to the heel plate that mounts to the back of the boot to make it stiffer than the first gen model, but ultimately you just can't increase the amount of metal that is in this frame too much without getting in the way of the larger wheels. The Ultra 80 on the other hand is, as mentioned, a true 4x80 frame. It takes no other configurations, and because of that, it's optimized for the 4x80 configuration. The 80 Ultra features a bridge in the center of the frame, and most notably, these extra lips of metal underneath the heel. And I believe it's this part that's really the sauce. This is a major part of why the frames are so stiff. Also, I weighed these frames without the axles, and the weight came in at 274 grams, but my scale couldn't decide whether to display 274 or 276, and the Endless website has them listed as 276, so we'll go with that. That means they weigh 9.7 ounces. The first gens weighed in 246 grams or 8.8 ounces. That's a difference of 30 grams or about 1 ounce. When I hold these frames side by side, I can't tell a difference at all in the weight. And I wanted to contrast where they weigh in against other 4x80 frames, but unfortunately, it's not standard practice by other manufacturers to list the weight of their products. So I grabbed my Power Slide Katana 4x80, which weighed in much lighter. It makes sense. The walls of the katana are slightly thinner, and it has sections thinned even further and cut out in order to make it as light as possible, which is great for the katana because it was produced as a slalom frame. However, I've skated this frame in the city a fair bit, and it's not a great experience in terms of ride comfort and shock absorption. When I first started testing the 80 Ultra, I was of the mind that I should be on smooth testing ground first. A controlled environment where I could get a good feel for their performance without too many outside variables. Very early on into this test, I realized that they were stiff. Incredibly stiff. And actually what I mean by that is I instantly recognize these are the stiffest 165 frames I have ever skated. God, they're stiff. I had been going to the local weekly group skates for about a month on the standard Endless 80, which never felt like a bendy frame at all, but when I started to skate on the Ultra, the increase in power transfer was vast and obvious. Another major advantage to me is that I could feel a change in how I was able to skate with the shorter frames. Because of this, the 80 Ultra felt very much like the experience I have on my CCM Jet Speed hockey skates. I really started to understand why Bill Stoppard was paralleling these frames with ice hockey skates. And here's where I want to sidestep for a moment to make a very important point and explain why your experience may differ from mine. The usable length of the blades on my hockey skates versus the wheelbase on the 80 Ultra frame is virtually identical. For my European size 42 foot, the 80 Ultra is able to create this nearly one-to-one experience and allow all of my power skating abilities from the ice to really open up in the street. And for that, I'm head over heels for these frames. However, we have to note here that hockey skates are designed so that every skater has the same experience in terms of the size of the boot versus the size of the blades. A smaller boot means a smaller blade, and a larger boot means a larger blade. The blade size is matched with every numerical size that the boot can have. But as you probably know, the 165 mounting system operates on a one-size-fits-all philosophy, and therefore we have a single frame size that will mount to many different boot sizes. So if you wear a size 42, it's very likely this will feel just like your hockey skates in terms of blade to boot sizing. The surrounding sizes of 41 and 43 might not make a massive difference, but there still will be a difference, however small. And of course, if your foot is a size 40 or smaller, you may feel like the frame is quite long and not nearly as maneuverable. Not the end of the world, but worth noting to you while I sit here and talk about how much it felt like my hockey skates. Unless you are also a size 42, your mileage will definitely vary from mine. Regardless, to me, they were a very familiar experience. I was able to execute my steps quickly in a way that long frames can't accommodate. The agility and power in my stride was satisfying, and I felt in this first session like I didn't want to go home. I just wanted to keep skating them. I sprinted some, did a few stops and tight turns, etc., and even pushed the wheels pretty hard to see how far I could lean on the edges without losing traction. I ended up scraping my boots on the ground while turning a few times, and they never slipped out from under me. The one grievance I have with them here is the choice to use the rocker that Endless has coined enhanced flat. While they definitely are not a flat setup, they're barely rockered at all. When gliding forward, if you weigh more than a mouse, your weight will have all four wheels in contact with the ground. And when you're turning and you have your weight centralized more in the back for tighter turns, the front wheel will come off the ground and you'll have three in contact. I get why Endless did this. They want your experience to be more about stability because it's a frame made for skating the street. But I can skate faster on my ice skates than I can on my inlines because there is less friction. And while they're far more rockered, they're still perfectly stable, even on the straightaway when there's no grip on the ice to help stabilize. I think that the better choice here would have been to stick with the balanced rocker from the standard Endless 80 model, especially since they're mainly sold for feet my size or smaller. The upside here is if I wear enough off of the front and back wheels and I don't rotate the center out of their position, I'll probably get the rocker that I want with time, but out of the box, the rocker experience isn't what I think it could have been. Which is my segue into why these frames are obviously not built for wizard skating. Any style that involves a lot of 3-turn movements or any other turn that involves an edge change is not going to match up well with a frame that's closer to flat than it is a true rockered setup. Since wizard skating involves a lot of 3 turns and other turns where a change of edge occurs, it needs a setup with a deeper rocker, no matter the length of the frames. These frames were built for stability and power, and it shows. Power skating is clearly where they shine. My next session, I wanted to try out how well they perform in the street. I met up with my local inline group, the DFW Inline Skate Club. Shameless plug for my friends here. If you're in the Dallas area, drop a comment and I'll get you in the Discord so you can meet up with us. The 80 Ultra performed in the street very well, and because they have such great power transfer, I was able to squeeze a lot of acceleration out of them. Our regular route has plenty of varying textures and combinations of slopes, both uphill and downhill. I think uphill is really where these frames shine for me. I did a sprint start on a pretty slanted uphill alongside Kurt here, who is exceptionally fast and a distance skater. He has a 4x100 speed frame on in this shot, and we ran neck and neck. On the straightaway, Kurt is a faster skater than I am, and being able to accelerate ahead of him the whole way up this hill really says to me that the equipment I have is my advantage here. On the downhill, we've got this example where Aaron and I are skating pretty hard to hit the peak of a slope with as much speed as possible. Aaron is using the Endless 90 Trinity in 4x90, and the 80 Ultra has no problem allowing me to run right alongside him. Toward the end of the hill, he overtakes me, but in a downhill, that's to be expected that the skater with larger wheels will likely reach a higher speed. Another point I want to make is that while 4x80 will never have as high of a top speed as something like a 3x100 or larger, most of the skaters in my group are running larger wheel tri-skate frames like 3x110 and even some 3x125, and I never felt like I was lagging behind them. I think this is a lot to do with how little energy is lost in my stride with a really stiff frame like this. What I can say is that the 80 Ultra is just a phenomenal experience. To me, the most satisfaction I get in my skating comes from having a very agile experience. And I know I've reviewed lots of longer frames over the years, but this platform is where I think my style really shines. Agility, deep edges, and lots of power in every stride, stroke, or push is where it's at for me, as well as being able to step into every element quickly. And since power skating is the discipline I prefer in the street, it's a no-brainer that I'll be using these skates for this purpose more than any others. I do have a handful of 80mm frames, but I only ever use them in controlled settings because they just don't perform well in the street. Especially when you're in a group of people that are all using big wheels, it becomes hard to keep up. But on these 80 Ultras, even though I'm using 80mm wheels, I don't have any issues with the road unless it gets unbearably rough. And that's another point of contention, that because the frames are so stiff, while energy is efficiently transferred from my foot to the ground, it does work the other way around. So when things get really rough, I feel it from the ground up to my feet. I can skate through it usually without any issues, but the bumpiness is definitely there. I would say that the saving point for this drawback is that the 80mm wheels have more urethane and less core than the 84mm wheels and larger tend to have. Those larger platform wheels generally have larger cores and less urethane, which means the 80mm wheels do help dampen some of the shock. And that means the difference in the standard Endless 80 and the 80 Ultra in terms of shock is not much, simply because in the former, you have a more shock absorbent frame with less shock absorbent wheels. And in the latter, there's more of a dampening of the shock from the wheels, but less from the frames. Overall, I rate these frames very high in terms of design and performance. I feel like a much faster, more confident skater when I'm using them, and I don't think that the slight issues I take with them, being less rockered or a little less shock absorbent, are deal breakers by any means. The amount of control I have in them means I'm able to open up and really push my abilities, and it also means I can recover from blunders quickly. The Endless 80 Ultra is truly optimized for performance in the street, and I'm pretty sure these are what I'll be using for the remainder of my outdoor skating season this year. If you enjoyed this video, please click the like button and leave me a comment. Tell me what you liked the most or what you think about these new frames from Endless Blading. I do read most of the comments and love to have discussions with you all about skating, so I'm happy to answer your questions whenever I have time as well. Also, please subscribe to my channel so you get updates when I release new skating content. Thank you for watching my Endless 80 Ultra review, and I'll see you the next time I lace up.